Alright, Diablo 4 players, let's go over how you can price your items, how to list your items, as well as a just general trade guide for Diablo 4. So for starters, there's tons of different trade websites. They may interact a little bit differently. Just to make the experience a little bit easier, I'm just going to be focusing in on the current most popular one, which is Diablo.trade. So there's tons of different websites. Use whatever one you want, but I frequently get asked, Sladra, how do I know how much this item is worth, or can you check up the price? And it really comes down to checking out some of the completed listings and also some game knowledge. So for starters, there's lots of different trade websites. They, again, interact differently, but in order to start trading, you need to first off be able to determine what your item is before you're going to be able to list it. So for a quick little example over here, over on the top right, you can see where it says create listing. All you got to do is click on that. It's going to bring you to another page, and then you can copy and paste your item. But then it's going to ask you how you want to price your item. And you can either take a screenshot, or you can just put that it's equipment, or maybe you're offering a leveling service or a boss killing service, right? And then you're going to go and select, is it a legendary, is it ancestral? You do everything, right? And then the main thing that people want to know is like the price. But I figure we're going to go ahead and make this video all the way, so might as well go ahead and show how to do this. So obviously you're going to type in every single field. Do not leave anything out, as some people are only searching for a very specific thing, and they will not bother looking for an item that is not properly listed. Honestly, a screenshot is 1,000 times easier, but you can manually input if you want to. This part of the video is going to be really quick, but basically you just list out everything. It shouldn't really need too much explanation, and then you just hit submit, and then you're going to go ahead and hit like confirm after it asks you, are you sure? And then that's all you really need to do to actually list the item. But the most important thing is, how can you actually price your item? So under items over here, you'll see that there is a filter on the right side. On this right side, you're going to be able to click where it says sold listings. So what you can do is find your exact item. And this could be a lot of different things. If you have no idea what your item is worth, the best thing to do is check out what other things have sold for. Now, I'll use a couple different examples of some of the meta stuff, but if it is non-meta, honestly, the price of the item still could be worth something because there's a niche player out there looking for that specific thing. But for the most part, there isn't some sort of very specific number on a lot of the stats like you would have in Path of Exile, where a character needs very specific resistances. Basically, the higher number is always better. So as far as niche goes, there's a lot less here, just to be completely transparent. But ideally, what you're trying to look for is make sure you click where it says sold listings, and then you want to also look for the exact item. Maybe you have a unique, maybe you have the Oculus. How much does the Oculus sell for? I don't know. Let's go ahead and check out. You'll see that the Oculus over here has lots of different things that will go into if the item is worth something. Sometimes it is going to have more value on a very specific thing because people are looking for greater affixes. I'm going to be honest, unless it's an amulet, pretty much at this point, if it doesn't have a greater affix, the chances of people actually looking for it are slim to none. That's the reality of it. But if it does happen to have a greater affix, it can actually be worth some. And you can see just even some of the uniques, even though uniques in this game kind of suck, to be honest, but there are still people out there that are still looking to buy. And you can see their prices definitely range. I mean, there's one for 360 million, there's one for 50 million, there's one for 1 million. How do you know what yours is worth? And the honest answer to this is whatever someone's willing to pay is what it is worth. And as time goes on, the items that you're going to be selling are going to need to get better and better, as some items will simply lose value because, well, the person already got their best in slot. The person that's playing 1,000 hours a day is obviously not going to have the amount of gold to spend on something because they're already done. They don't need it anymore. And so there's also sometimes you'll see items like this for 100. Now, did this actually sell for 100? To be honest, I don't know. Could he meant 100 million? Sure, that's more than likely what has happened. So you can't always go off of a completed listing. But just in general, just to give you guys kind of some idea, some of the things that would be actually worth certain, like a huge amount of golds, are going to be specifically items that have a bunch of different greater affixes that a lot of people builds can actually utilize. So to kind of explain that, you have to look kind of at what the meta is for the game. Like, for example, if you're playing Barbarian, the Bash Barbarian is pretty much one of the best ones. If you're playing Druid, one of the best ones is either Tornado Druid, or you can look at the Wind Shear Druid. Necromancer, you have plus ranks to Golem on your chest piece to get good value, but it's mainly minions. For Rogue, we have the Heartseeker. Then for the Sorceress, it's either the Firebolt, Fireball, or I'm sorry, Firebolt, Firewall, and then you also have the other Frozen Orb build. So that's kind of what the meta looks like. Depending on if it's meta or not, again, that is kind of what determines the value of an item. And prices fluctuate all the time, but this is going to be a real quick little addition that I wanted to add to the video, which I want to start off by saying, how many greater affixes does the item actually have? And to kind of visually represent and show kind of the evolution of the pricing guide, let's go ahead and use boots as an example. Now, it's going to be very, very different for amulets and very specific uniques, but this will give you somewhat of an idea on what to kind of try to price your item, because listing as make an offer sometimes can be literally a waste of time for you and the person buying. So to kind of visually show how we are upgrading here, let's take a look at these boots. So what we ideally want to see is at least one greater affix. Otherwise, again, for the most part, unless it's an amulet, people won't want to go ahead and actually make a purchase here. So you can see these sold for 12 million, but there are ones that are going to be selling for more and less. But just for a general guideline here, let's use this as an example. We've got one greater affix. Let's go to the next step of like what would make a good pair of boots. Well, you maybe want another character's main stat. That could be strength, dexterity, it could be a resistance, it could be armor, but it has to be a usable stat that the person can actually use. So then you can see this one sold for basically 10 times the price. Now what if we go and add 3 greater affixes, the best in slot? Well, you can see this one over here sold for $1 billion. So this is a pair of boots that I actually picked up a long time ago, and this is best in slot. Like, there's nothing else that will replace this pair of boots. Now, there's also one other thing to factor in, and what is the implicit on it? Is it attacks, reduce, evades, cooldown? Is it going to be more evade charges? There are different builds that may want something that you might not even think about. So to visually represent kind of all of the different like levels, we can kind of use this as an example. Again, keep in mind, prices always fluctuate, but if you want to flip items really fast, getting things with one greater affix and then flipping them from anywhere from 1 to 10 mil is a pretty consistent way to actually trade. Now, if you happen to have 2 greater affixes, that can go for 10 to 100. Again, it depends on what you actually are rolling on the item. Certain things are going to be more rare than others, like I mentioned before. But like a best in slot, I mean, you can go from 100 mil to $1 billion. And I know the range is quite far, and it's really hard to price items in the game and give you guys a definitive answer because it's kind of what the market will actually be willing to actually purchase. But as time goes on, certain things may cost less and more. That's just a general guideline. This can apply to a lot of different things. If it's gloves, you definitely want attack speed, you want crit strike chance. Otherwise, again, people will just simply look over them. So at least this will give you a quick little like guideline on what makes an item like, you know, okay, you can sell for a little bit, now it's worth a little bit more, and then bam, you got like the best in slot and you can maybe sell it for $1 billion. It doesn't need to have all triple greater affixes. Ideally, you just need 2 of the greater affixes to be good, because more than likely the person will then reroll the other last stat. But certain greater affixes are more rare than others, specifically on a lot of the ranks to the basic skills. That is a category that a lot of people want that greater affix in and are willing to pay a premium literally just for that one stat. For example, this is the Bash Barbarian pants. So for the Barbarian, you definitely want to get these particular pants, and you can see that they range, man. I mean, there's one over here for 100 million that is still really good, and it's just as good pretty much as the one that has sold for 600 million. The difference is the amount of strength. The fire res, the life per second, those are going to be rerolled anyway, so that is pretty much an irrelevant stat. So when you're listing and you're trying to compare an item, don't even bother putting some of the stats in, because you will see a smaller pool of results, and your whole goal is to find out kind of what my item is. Because trying to find that very specific, oh, okay, his had 77 strength, is mine that has 80 strength worth way more? Not really, to be honest. Now, if it was greater affix strength, then I would put that into the filter, right? I would add that to the filter when I'm searching for my item. Now, there is also another bonus tip that I want to give you guys that is kind of difficult to actually search for. For example, I was interested in buying a unique item called the Azarath. And the Azarath, unfortunately, has a stat where I cannot actually filter. So if I was looking for the Azarath, right, I would type in Azarath, but I'm trying to look for, let's say, attack speed to be greater affix. So I'd go to add group, I go to the effect group, and I would look for attack speed. This is not completed listings, by the way, this is the lists here. There's a little thing at the very top. My face is blocking it, so let's move it out of the way. So see at the top, we have sold listings and exact price listings. So we are looking basically, if I was to buy the item, one of the problems that I'm going to kind of explain. So there are certain things that you can't roll on items anymore that are kind of considered old stats. And a lot of the stuff for this website, and it's different for everyone, like let's say I really wanted to get damage to crowd control, right? I can't. There's no damage to crowd control. It doesn't appear. There's also non-physical damage. That effect doesn't even appear. And you can see that, well, technically you can add these other group things, but let's say I was trying to look for in another group for like attack speed. Okay, yeah, it's still there, but I still can't go for like the non physical damage. It like doesn't exist on the search. So what becomes very difficult is to try to find an item to kind of match up. So the best way is to just kind of scroll through it. You can also hit Control F and then type whatever you're looking for, and then you can go like crowd controlled, and then you'll at least see the highlighted stat, and you can do this with, again, completed listings or listings if you're interested in to buy them. Now, there's also another stat that becomes very difficult because this roll over here, see where it says 16,241 cold damage. Now, you might think, oh, the higher number is always better. That's not actually the case. Now, with certain items that roll from like, let's say it rolls from like 0 damage, because it actually will start there, and then it can go to like 22,000. Depending on your character's power or certain stats in the game, you cannot actually take a proper screenshot, because how these work are these are actual screenshots. So what it requires you to do is you have to actually message the person to ask them what the actual number is. Is it the perfect roll? Because if this is not perfect, this is the only reason why you'd realistically play Azarath, other than like maybe the greater affix attack speed. But the thing is, with items in general, it is very difficult to list certain things, and that's what I'm trying to just explain to you guys. Now, some of the stuff that is actually the big money, okay, because like I get asked all the time, did I just get a jackpot? Really what it comes down to is getting greater affixes on the amulet. So I know this video doesn't say specifically, oh, if your item has 1 greater affix, it's 5 million. If it has 3, it's 1 billion. It doesn't really work like that because there's so many different things to factor in. How hard is the roll to get, and what is that item's category, and does it have 2 bad stats? Because if it has 2 bad stats, the chances of it being worth a lot of gold are going to be a lot less. It is very difficult in Diablo to roll plus ranks to amulet. If you guys have played the game, you probably know. Now, for example, this one over here, it's sold for 250. Now, does that mean 250 gold? More than likely not. Like, I mean, if someone actually sold this for 250, they scammed themselves. But realistically, this did not sell for this price. But ideally, amulets are the hardest thing to roll, and those are going to be essentially the thing that has the most value. But to just look at items in general, what you do want to try to do to list your item at a relatively fair price, it's really difficult to actually give you guys a general guideline. So again, the best way would be to just check out the completed listings where you select on the top, once again, is to select where it says sold listings. And you can also check out what other people are selling that specific item for. That is another way where you can kind of look at, what are items actually selling for. But in general, there are certain stats that are much better than others. For example, a greater affix on a bow for vulnerable damage is really popular in the Heartseeker. That can be worth like this amount. But if you were to get this, let's say on a crossbow, well, it's not necessarily worth the same amount. And you might be thinking, well, oh, is a sword and a dagger, they're kind of the same. No, because the implicit is actually always going to be different for different categories. So again, make sure that you are looking at that. In general though, because I get asked all the time, like, is this worth anything? And it's so difficult. And there isn't really like a good, like, oh, unless I see the item, I could tell you exactly what the item is worth. But what you can do is kind of use this rule of thumb. So if it has 1 greater affix, if it's like your main character set, so if it's like strength or dexterity or even just getting life roll, those are considered very common ones to go ahead and get. Therefore, they're not going to be holding a lot of value. So if it just happens to have one of those, I was consistently flipping items in the very beginnings of the game for anywhere from 5 to 10 million with just 1 greater affix. Just anything with 1 greater affix, you can see like 5 to 10 mil. If you want to flip items fast, that is a quick way to do it. But don't do it if you happen to have like a greater affix on a very good item. Like for example, where we had like the Bash Barbarian Pants, that could be worth a lot more. The ranks to Heartseeker, if I was to go for, let's say, exact price or sold listings, and then I went into, let's say, a greater affix of Heartseeker. If I was to go for a greater affix of Heartseeker, you can see these are actually worth a decent amount. Like these could be worth 100 mil plus. Again, when I was mentioning like, okay, if it has just 1 greater affix, it's a common one, again, 5 to 10 mil, you can start flipping things quite fast. And that is how you make gold in the game. But there are other items that that can still sell for 15 mil, and like a lot of people would probably just throw this away. Although this does have heavy-handed, it's not a greater affix. A lot of times, with the amulet in particular, even if it doesn't have a greater affix, the little like star next to it, it is still going to slightly be worth something. And there's a lot of items where people will actually list things quite cheap. So if you're interested in buying stuff, the best way is to just kind of refresh the page once in a while. What I do personally, especially when I'm streaming, is I have this on another monitor on a search query that I have like some sort of search parameters, and I just refresh it once in a while, and a lot of times you can get really good deals. I have had a lot of deals where I'm buying them for, let's say, 25 mil, and there are lots of people that have completed listings of 300 mil. It just comes down to just offering where people actually say, make an offer. They don't list it. They're just like, whatever, I don't care. And you can get good deals. And I know it's kind of a weird video because, like, I would love to tell you, oh, if it has one greater affix, it's worth this. But ideally, if it has like one greater affix, 5 to 10 mil if it's a very common thing, but it can go way higher, and I would recommend you to search for what that is. But again, strength, willpower, intelligence, or maximum life, those are all super common rolls to the point where like they're not going to be in demand. But when you start getting into the double greater affixes, I mean, you can get into the 100 mil to crazy amounts, again, especially on the amulet. But I feel like that's enough for this video. Otherwise, I would start repeating myself in terms of like, yeah, there's so many niche different options for it, but just see what things have actually sold for. That's kind of one of my biggest tips, as well as there are just some things that aren't going to be able to be shown in any filter. Doesn't matter if you're using Crimson Trade or the Diablo.trade website or Discords or whatever the case may be. The best way is, again, to check completed listings, but be realistic. If you see a bunch of items selling for, you know, billions, and then there's one for 200, don't think, oh man, like mine's only worth 200. No, obviously that is either a scammer, a price fixer, or he actually meant like 250 billion or something like that, or 250 million. It happens sometimes. People list things for too cheap or too expensive, and some people generally don't care. Like while I'm streaming, I have given away multiple 3 greater affix pieces of gear if I don't need them and I don't really feel like listing them. If it's not a stat that I feel like is going to sell for billions, I don't have any stash space, so I just can give it away. So if you run out of stash space, that is another thing when you are listing items. Maybe start listing them as cheaper because, well, simply people aren't buying them. But you can see this over here. Some people would just throw this away. They'd be like, well, it's only +2 to Golem Mastery, not even greater affix. Is anyone going to buy it? Well, he just got 10 mil for it. And all of this stuff adds up. It is by far the best way to get gold. But anyways, that's going to wrap things up. Hopefully this video was informative enough and you guys learned something. If you did, drop a like on it. If you're new here, hit subscribe, turn that bell, and hopefully this gives you somewhat of an idea to the Diablo market. And also, I want to link these 2 other videos. It tells you kind of what to look for when you are actually trading items. Otherwise, this video would have been too long if I added all of that info in this one. But this will give you somewhat of a guideline for listing your items.